Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Finance and Audit Committee meeting to order. I'd like to first recognize we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Sami First Nation, and our clerk this morning will be Sheila Dury. The question period sign-up sheet is at the chair in front of the gallery, and if anyone during the meeting has a question relating to an agenda item, could they please write down their name and the agenda item on the sheet, and I'll call you up during question period to address council. We have no late items per se, except that Ms. Curry, I think, given the people who are here this morning, and looking at the schedule, that we should perhaps swap 7F and 7K, which would leave what will probably be the longest item till the conclusion of the meeting, as we may well not be able to get through it this morning. If that meets with council's approval, then I would move a motion for adoption of the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Hammond, seconded by Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. A motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Councillor Turley, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have no presentations or delegations, but we do have a number of reports this morning. So, Emergency Preparedness Mobile App Host Community Grant. Sounds like one of those modern things the mayor doesn't really understand or use appropriately, right? Good morning, Ms. Mercer. You're going to be presenting?
I will introduce it, and then Ms. Lindsay, she will go into the details, as she knows all more the nitty-gritty. So we have received a grant through UBCM for emergency. This is a different one. Sorry, I have two different reports. We received an $11,000 grant through UBC. It's the UBC University Engagement Support Fund, and we administer the money and do engagement presentations with other communities. And I'll let Karen Lindsay describe it a little bit more than I can, and she's been involved with more of the details.
So it's a partnership between. What do you want me to come up from a picture?
Take the starring role here.
Oh, sure.
So we were approached, I would say, in November of last year by a group of researchers from UBC. And they approached us and other island communities about the opportunity to develop a mobile app that would allow residents in our community and participating communities to develop their own emergency preparedness plans. What really intrigued us was in addition to the hazards that we've identified, it was kind of coming on the heels of the climate resiliency study. So we thought that would be a great opportunity to get on board with this group of researchers in the other communities to support some of the public education components of the climate resiliency study as well. So the first meetings for this are in March. We are administering, so we're going to be the host community. And as the report says, the other participating communities will be City of Parksville, Town of Qualicum, Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District, Oak Bay Regional District, Strathcona Regional District, and Tofino Regional District. So it's kind of a large geography of communities participating. And the hope of this is that when the app is developed, it will, once we're able to get it out into the community and get people using, it will enhance our resiliency as a community. So not just on the individual level, but as an organization as well. So the first meetings are scheduled for March, and then the team will go away, and they have received a $15,000 grant to develop this app, and then we'll then push it out to our community once it's finalized.
Any questions for Ms. Lindsay? Thank you very much, and I want to thank you also for assisting me to do our little presentation. I think it was fairly well received, and I appreciate the work you continue to do on behalf of the city. Thank you. The next is Community Program Development Grant for the Nanaimo Science and Sustainability Society. Mr. Harding.
Good morning, Your Worship. We're pleased to bring to you a grant to the NS Rees Society for $3,000. This is a community development program grant that's really set up as seed money to start new initiatives in the community. And NS Rees come up with a very creative program. We have 2 intakes a year. This is an intake for the last November, I believe, and so we'll have another intake later on this year. 2 more intakes this year. So we're recommending the Finance and Audit Committee recommend the Council approve the request from the Nanaimo Science and Sustainability Society for a community program development grant amount of $3,000 to assist in funding science in the park summer program for children and families. Please answer any questions you have.
I think this is a fairly easy one. Councillor Brown has moved the recommendation. Councillor Turley is seconded. His hand is very quick. Councillor Bonner, wish to say something?
Just questions of Meg. Thank you, Worship. Through you, staff. Ordinarily, in the past, when this was looked at through committees, we would get minutes, or the council would get minutes of the actual committee meeting. They would probably include the grant application and the reason why it was not eligible. And I was thinking because council could at that time decide that maybe the transition grant they thought was eligible or was worth it, and they would have seen the grant in the report. But we're not getting any of that now. All we're just getting the staff recommendations. So is that something that we could look at as including in the report? Just even the reasons why it's not eligible?
Your Worship, through Council Bonner, absolutely we can add that. We can also answer any questions on why that. We did list the 3 other applicants that did not meet the guidelines. We can answer any questions you have on that, but in the future we could include the applications, similar to what we do with some other grants, as you're correct, on why they did not meet the criteria.
Okay, and if I may add, just quick, I'm not doubting your decisions here at all. I just was curious why they, if there's a short way of saying why they weren't eligible.
Would you like to go through all 3? Your Worship?
Just Cole's notes, if you know.
Yep, absolutely. So the Alano Club, it was not a new program. It was really as an operating to help operate the organization. So it wasn't a new program. The Transition Society, again, not a program, just an overall engagement to the public. So it wasn't something that was going to be adding to it. The Nanaimo African Society was not a new program. It was really just fund what they've had done in the years past. So again, this is intended to, as seed money to start. It's also not intended to be ongoing funding for these programs.
Great, thanks.
If no further questions, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. The next is item C, next phase for Nanaimo Art Gallery development and implementation. Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Your Worship. Last council meeting last month, the Art Gallery came in the presentation. Staff indicated at that time that we bring a recommendation to council. I was starting to, if it could be approved by council, to explore the next phase of the Art Gallery development. This goes back a number of years when, as the report indicates, when we initially, the Art Gallery was looking to consolidate a number of years ago all their operations from PIU and when they had the Art Center at the time into one building. After a number of reviews of looking at new buildings and old buildings, council at the time, the staff recommendation was to consolidate the operations through a phased approach into 150 Commercial, which is now the Art Gallery. The Art Gallery has successfully done phase 1. They've also successfully done phase 2 and kind of what we consider a 2.5. Now staff's recommending, as well as with the gallery's support, to explore the options of moving forward with phase 3 to phase 4 and back to council before budget deliberations of this year with some options for consideration. So we have 2 recommendations for you. I can read them all to your worship.
Any questions for Mr. Harding? Councillor Brown, Turley, and Evans.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Harding. I noticed in the report there that it sort of suggests there were like 50,000 in 2020 2020-21. I'm just curious why that wasn't part of our budget deliberations this year.
Yes, Your Worship, for a number of reasons with transitions and just getting council was something that staff, myself, didn't get to for deliberations.
Thank you. And if I may just follow up, would this just impact their timeline, essentially, if it was pushed for a year?
That's, Your Worship, again, Councillor Brown. We'd come back and then we'd change their phases of how they're looking for those implementations. Sorry, Your Worship, but as the gallery outlined, there's 4 key areas that they're looking at as issues of driving some of their operations. I've listed those 4 back in the report. And staff would then, if approved, we'd look at those key areas of issues of moving forward to the next phase of development. Come back with recommendations on each of those.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through your staff, it's probably a case that I'm just confused, but we've been getting emails lately about an arts center. And that has absolutely nothing to do with this, or is this part of the same equation? Anyway?
Your Worship, Councillor Turley, I wouldn't say it's not equated. There's definitely there's 2 different groups or organizations. But again, I think we move through, we could come back and in our discussions with both organizations, see where there's some commonality, some aspects of moving forward. But it is 2 separate organizations, or one organization I believe is sunsetting and coming forward. But we can also provide council more clarification when we come back later this year on both of those.
Okay. Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Harding. My understanding is that eventually the art gallery may incorporate some community art space. Is that also your understanding of phase 3 or potentially phase 4 of what the gallery is trying to do?
Yes, and I have to go back on each of those details, but it is one of the major phase 4 is expansion of the gallery. So again, I think one of the major goals of the gallery was to become a Class A gallery. And so a number of the objectives moving forward in the next phases for consideration, which we'll be looking at those.
Okay.
If that helps.
It does. Thank you.
And I don't wish to set off any alarm bells anywhere, Mr. Harding, but given the building, that would mean the movement of some existing organizations from that space to some other space within the city.
Your Worship,
The Councillor Hammonds very optimistically said expansion of the building, and I'm just wondering, is there any thought given to that? And if so, would we be going up? Because I don't think there's much room to go out.
Right. So, Your Worship, at the time when we brought the proposal forward to council, there was the realization of the tenants below may need to be reestablished in other locations. That's not the case right now with the art gallery. They've seemed to have amalgamated and continued with those tenants. But the other option was moving out. If there was an expansion at the time, one of the concepts was building up over the parking lot and going up to that.
And if
There was a number of things,
sorry.
Yeah.
If I may, just some further context, possibly to Councillor Turley, when the gallery went to the A classification, it limited its ability to showcase local artists, which it had been a function of that previously. So now we have not a displaced, but we have a group that is really seeking an opportunity, and this might be a really good partnership.
Your Worship, Council Hammonds, again, those are options we can look at with you, and particularly that seems to be a lot of the emails Council getting right now is that where local amateur artists can present. So we can look at some of those.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you, the staff again. Is this 50,000 each year, or is it 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 at the end of the 4 years?
Your Worship, Council Bonner, my understanding, and we'll continue to work with the board, is it's an additional 50,000 each year to the operating grant.
So at the end of 2024, in theory, or for 2025, how much will they be getting each year?
I have to add that up, but it's big. I believe they got 160 now. It might be off. That would be another.
So 360? And this may be a tough question, do you know how that compares to what the Port Theatre gets as part of their co-management?
I could get those exact, sorry, Worship, I can get those exact numbers to you. They're around 500, 100,000. The museums and more than that. It's more than is in between both of those numbers.
Okay.
But I can easily get those to you.
Thanks so much.
Councillor Bonner's wisely point out, 50 grand here, 50 grand there, pretty soon you're talking real money.
Well, it's a 0.048% increase.
And Your Worship, if I could, one of the opportunities in doing this review is what we had a similar issue with the Port Theatre a number of years ago where they're having some operating issues. So we use a model called co-management model rather than just a separate lease with some of our main community partners. So one of the options here too is look at the co-management agreement and see if there's some other opportunities where there's still a dollar cost to it, but we move some of the more of the capital, some of the operating issues, and because these are all city venues. Do we add a little bit more into our capital planning and operating to have the groups do more of what they do best, and that's the programming, and we would come back with options for council's consideration on that as well.
Thank you very much. Would anyone care to move the recommended motions? Councillor Hemmings, Councillor Thorpe. Discussion? Councillor Thorpe.
Just briefly, Your Worship, seeing as others have spoken, I support this wholeheartedly. I think the art gallery serves a very useful function in our community, and it has some real maintenance issues right now, upkeep problems that need to be addressed. And I think in the longer term, there's an opportunity here, as Mr. Harding has suggested and Councillor Hemmings has spoken to, that there could be partnerships to allow for other groups to use that space and maybe even grow that space. So I see this as something which is necessary to further this component of the arts center downtown.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the Rotary Centennial Garden Project update. Mr. Harding.
Worship, this is a little different for us to go back to. We, as you council know, have been supported working with Rotary on their Centennial project from a fail this year, which would be built in time for their 100-year Centennial celebrations. Staff worked with the club for over a couple of years now, and the club has fulfilled their obligations of trying to do the $200,000, which they've done. However, as some projects go, the tenders have come back substantially higher than what we would anticipated. So that we've given you a couple options for consideration. The first one is to fund the shortfall, $186,120 from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. There's other options there where council may want to consider that we cancel the tender, work with the club to redesign and come back with something that meet that budget. We've given you some pros and cons of all those options, and we can discuss any of those as council sees fit. But staff believe it's a good project. It will tie into the redevelopment at the same time as the playground. So the disruption to the park users we hope will be once and not a number of times. So our staff's recommendation is to proceed, and we've given you a couple funding options to look at.
Councillor Brown.
The recommendation. Sort of staff recommendation.
Is there a second? Councillor Hemmings. Councillor Brown.
Yes, through you, probably Ms. Mercer. I'm just curious the status of our Port Theatre grant, just because we're talking about the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve.
Your Worship, Councillor Brown, we have not had an update yet. We have, the only update we've got is that the province has heard from the federal government. So we're still waiting, everybody's waiting for the federal government to make a decision. And we haven't been given a timeline for that.
Thank you. Anyone else on this one? Councillor Hemmings.
Thanks. I just have to ask the question. We often see projects come in over budget, but this is almost double what was anticipated. So do we know why? it was so high the tender came back?
It's, Your Worship, Councilor Hammond, it's a unique project. There's some elements to it with the lighting and the pavers and such. It's not a typical, not to pick on engineering, but it's not a typical road or pipe that goes in. So there's some extra costs that came with the designs. We tried to anticipate, even with the pergolas, the pergola design that they wanted was a little more than anticipated.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow up on that through you to Mr. Harding, would it be fair to say that some of the extra cost involving the infrastructure for this project would also apply to other areas in the park?
Your Worship, Councillor Thorpe, not necessarily. There's some aspects to that with some power and such, but we're also utilizing some of the power and utilities for the playground. So there's some trying to do that. It is just a unique project. It's going to be quite spectacular, but the lighting and underground, the council's familiar with the area. There's really no services up to that point right now, so there is a lot of groundwork and base work to do, and it's all a field site, so there's some extra components of what we have to do to actually make it stable and not sink and things like that.
So I guess if I may, Your Worship, just to clarify what I was suggesting, Mr. Harding, is that some of these costs would also offset some of the development costs for the playground area, for example, in terms of the power and the lighting. Am I incorrect?
Your Worship, Councillor, possibly I'd have to ask Mr. Groot or Mr. Newlands on it. There's definitely we're definitely taking advantage of the staging and the working of both projects at the same time.
Right. That was my point. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not wanting to redesign this thing on the fly, but did we ever consider encouraging or building washroom facilities there? And the reason I ask is, I know we have them in the park, but if you're a parent and you have two children, one has to go, you got to bundle the ball up and move them down there and you go back. Was that ever considered in this design?
Your Worship, not in this, but in the master plan, the approved master, or the draft department, I feel something redevelopment master plan, we've looked at some rural services of adding some more washrooms out to that area. It's not in the capital plan right now, but it is something as we keep move on with that redevelopment of the park. It's another option we want to bring back. It'd be substantially more expensive than these because of the sewer and water, bringing those out to that area.
Only reason I ask is I listen to Mr. Sims on a regular basis, and if you're digging stuff up already, it's a lot cheaper to put pipe and everything else in the ground when the hole is there, as opposed to digging two holes. Okay, I'm just my 2 cents for today.
Point taken. Councillor Evans. Any further discussion? Well, I think it's fair to say that it's going to be a wonderful enhancement to what is already a spectacular park in the city, and I want to express on behalf of council gratitude to Rotary for putting in and raising $200,000 to ensure that it actually happens. So, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the Bevan Complex 2019 project cancellation report. Mr. Harding.
Your Worship, again, just as part of our procurement procedures, is bring forward to you when projects are going to be canceled. So it's bringing it forward to advise that this project is delayed or canceled for the time being, and we can answer any questions on that. When we would be coming back to you, if there's any questions on it, but it's really just advising of a project being canceled.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Ms. Harding again. Where does the money that was allocated for this project go once it's canceled?
Sorry.
It's canceled.
When we cancel a project like this and the money's already been allocated in capital plan, where does it go after this?
It depends on how it's funded, Your Worship. It's dependent on how it's funded. So if it's funded from a reserve, then that money just stays in the reserve to be used for the redesign or another project. If it's general revenue, it goes back. If it's funded from general revenue, then that stays and contributes to the surplus. or if we carry it forward, it will go to reserve. So it depends on how it is.
In this particular case, I don't remember seeing where it said it's funded from.
Reserves. It'll stay in reserves.
Instead of reserves.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Harding. And I didn't see a written report on this, but to me this is sort of an operational decision. But I am just curious about the reason for your recommendation. Is the work just not needed for another year? Are we just deferring it?
Actually, I'll ask Mr. Groot to answer the question.
Yes,
Answer better than I can.
Through your worship to Councillor Thorpe. So we did a review in 2017 of the facility and wanted some options around, because you can see that the paint is, aesthetically it's not looking new anymore, and so we wanted to do a refresher. So we had a local building envelope consultancy firm come and look and give us some short-term, long-term options in regard to, what we could do with the siding. The short-term option was to paint so that we could gain some years in regard to what our longer term thoughts would be around, Bevan Park, the redevelopment, maybe the infill of that breezeway and just some of those things. So fast forward 2019, 2020, the testing coming back in advance of going to tender, there were substances involved in the old metal and the old paint that then would lead to a very considerable abatement process, which had not been considered from a budgetary perspective. So rather than proceed with, and you're not going to gain that life expectancy that we had hoped for. So the idea now then is to use a little bit of that funding that we had allocated for the painting, do a thorough thermal energy study of the existing siding, and see if there's a way for us to then upgrade the siding and increase energy, or just energy, and reduce consumption and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from those heating systems. So that's kind of where we're at now, is to do that review.
Thank you, that's good information.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Mr. Sims, we swapped F and K. Over to you for closed circuit television, video, equipment, and camera ban.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly, this is an outdated piece of equipment that is at the end of its life. So it was typically would be replaced as two separate units. We buy a van at 10 years old. We buy CCTV equipment at 10 years old. With advancements in technology and the way things were going, we wanted to marry them and buy a single purpose-built unit. And so a couple of years ago, we budgeted for this. We budgeted for the van as per the equipment replacement scheme. And we budgeted based on old technology, the CCTV equipment. So we were going to buy some old, or buy the camera that was formerly, that we based our pricing on previously. With the advancements in technology, we've got a much better system in front of us, the potential to purchase this if council approves it. And the budget is up significantly on the camera equipment, but we're buying it as an integrated unit, and the budget, the costing is significantly up, but the value to the city is also significantly up. So we're able to use the advanced technology, the advanced software, to do much more adequate or much more accurate condition assessments on our sanitary sewer system. And that really informs our asset management program. So for your consideration is an increased budget funded from sewer reserves for the camera equipment.
Moved by Councillor Hammond, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. David and Mr. Sims, so are there going to be any improved efficiencies in the new equipment, or does it just give you a better result?
A bit of both, yes. The unit, the camera van, and built with the built-in CCTV equipment will function as a better unit, so it'll be more robust. So that just operationally, it's a lot simpler to use. Yes.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is funding for overdose emergency response conference. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This may ring a bell for council. We were in front of you, it was last year now, where the province requested that we hold these funds, anticipating that there may be an operator and Nanaimo may be the preferred location for this conference. Since that time, we've come back and confirmed that Nanaimo is in fact going to be the site of the conference on overdose emergency response, and that is this year in 2020. And I'm sorry, I'm just looking for the operator's name here. To the British Columbia Patient Safety and Quality Council, will be operating the council. So this is just simply asking for council's approval to pass on the $200,000 that we originally collected for the conference last year.
Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Bonner, yes, sorry.
Forgot to wear my name today.
The two Bs, I know. Councillor Turley.
So the question I have is there any additional costs going to be incurred by the city, because I don't see any financial implications?
Your worship, through Councillor Turley, no additional costs have been requested.
All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. The next and the final item is Parks, Recreation, Culture, Fees and Charges Policy Update for September. Sorry.
Irrigation and I.
Yes, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Wrong page. British Columbia Poverty Reduction Grant Application. Mr. Lindsay again, sorry.
So, Your Worship, Mr. Lindsay has just noticed because he had to borrow a hard copy of the agenda. So the actual report isn't in the hard copy, it is online. So just for those of you that may not have seen it, for some reason the copy he has, it's missing. So it's probably an e-scribe issue. They've been deleting some sections of our agendas accidentally.
Technology.
Just for your information, it is online and available.
So thank you, Your Worship. As outlined in the report, there's an opportunity to become available for local governments to obtain up to $25,000 grant for a poverty reduction strategy. There's also an opportunity for municipalities to partner and increase the leverage of that grant. So our recommendation is to work with the Regional District in Nanaimo, leverage that partnership, and in turn we'd be eligible for a combined total of $150,000 grant. So just seeking council's support in proceeding with that partnership.
Moved Councillor Evans, seconded Councillor Bonner. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, staff. Do we have, I'm glad that we're taking this on, I appreciate that. And my question is, what are we expecting to see out of this work when it's done? Do we have any ideas what might be coming down the pipes?
Your Worship, I'll ask Ms. Bolton to join us and to provide some comments.
Could you go to the front, please, sir?
You want me to?
Yes, sure, just so that everybody can hear you.
We want the world to hear you, Ms. Bolton.
Okay, thank you. So the intent of this grant is actually syncing very well with our Health and Housing Task Force work that some of the council will be aware of on the systems mapping. So this social needs assessment done by the region will actually build on the work we're doing with the task force to identify all the different systems in our community dealing with health and housing. And building on that, this project, the regional district are applying for the grant for will be done in 2 phases. So they will do an assessment of what's going on in our region in terms of the different systems that deal with aspects of poverty. So as you can see, the work that we'll be doing at the Health and Housing Task Force, the systems mapping, will inform this process and be built on region-wide. And then the second phase is then the RDN will be doing a gaps, look at how to fill the gaps that have been identified in the first phase. And so working staff to staff, we realized there was a lot of synergy in collaborating on this project and making it wider. Issues like poverty are very fluid, and we know that with different things around health and housing, there's a strong interregional urban-rural connection as people move between the RDN and the cities for both their services, housing, transportation, those connections. So the intent is to be very integrated with our systems mapping process and work with our partners at the different levels. And the RDN is also going to be working with the different nations and how they'll fit in with this project as well. They aren't eligible, like similar to the childcare collaborative project that we're leading for the region. This is a similar type of approach where we're working collaboratively. And although the nations aren't eligible as partners be recipients of either the 25,000, they'll be included as another level of government with us.
Questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the sponsorship policy and program development. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in the last 6 months or so, the topic of sponsorship has come up for a couple of city facilities. And in order to deal with these kind of questions, the city needs how to decide how to move forward, if at all. So back in the fall, you received, at a special finance and audit committee, you received a presentation from Mr. Brent Bruce on the topic of sponsorship. And in that presentation, he outlined a possible way for the city to move forward. And his plan involved conducting a feasibility study or an inventory of asset valuation, develop and update a sponsorship policy, develop a sponsorship strategic plan, and then to begin actively seeking sponsorship revenues. So to that end, staff has taken Mr. Bruce's suggested steps and broken them into 3 phases. And we've done this one for ease of wading into this topic as well as spreading the costs as well. So we suggested that for phase 1, we issue an RFP to conduct a feasibility study or inventory of asset valuation to determine what we have to sell, what it's worth, and any potential revenue projections. Phase 2 would be to issue an RFP to develop, update a sponsorship policy. So this would outline general guidelines such as who the city would accept money from and who we wouldn't. So it would hash out what we want this policy to look like. We would also, in that RFP, look to develop a sponsorship strategic plan to move forward. And then phase 3 would be implementation of the sponsorship program. And there's many different ways we could do that. But we would, based on the first 2 phases, we would determine how we want to move forward to collect those revenues. So we're here to seek council's direction on whether you would like to move forward to investigate sponsorship revenue potential or not. So that's the question.
Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Worship. Having reread the report, this seems to be a long timeline. And I'm looking at the phase 1, and all the people who would probably do phase 1 could also do phase 2. And in the report, the presentation said that phase 2 could take between 2 and 4 weeks, and we're changing it into 5 months. And so I don't see why we just can't do them both at the same time and just put them out at the same RFP. And at the end of phase 1 in the RFP, they would then continue on with phase 2. And I think it would go a lot quicker, that's what I'm saying. And I think if it goes quicker, it would then be cheaper in terms of the RFP, if they're doing them both at once.
I'm going to go to Mr. Rudolph.
Your Worship, that's certainly an option through the council. Based on the observation of council's discussion at the last meeting, it wasn't entirely clear if council was a consensus had been reached on the comfort of going at that speed through both of these phases. So that's certainly an option, and that's a very valid comment. So that could be an option, or the option, the other more plodding along process, which is what I think Mr. Bruce suggested Kelowna did, was to do it in stages and everybody got their comfort level to a certain level and then sort of to the next stage. So But for efficiency purposes, and there would certainly be no obligation to endorse those policies once they come in. But yeah, it could be bundled as a package. And yeah, so certainly up to you how you package this. Either you don't want to proceed at this time, or you do want to proceed either in iterative stages or maybe combine the stages 1 and 2.
I'll go to Ms. Mercer before I go to Councillor Turley. You wanted to say something?
Yep.
No, you're okay?
Yep.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. So I'm struggling a little bit with the an RFP for determining feasibility study and particularly the inventory asset valuation. Because I would have thought, maybe I'm wrong, that under our asset management, we would have some idea of what assets we have as well as what replacement cost is going to be, that type of thing. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But if it's more designed to have somebody come in and look and determine, well, that would fit and this wouldn't, that makes more sense. But I'm just not sure what the process is here.
Ms. Mercer.
Through your worship, Councillor Shirley. The intent of this inventory would be to assess what facilities we have, or I'm not sure if it encompasses trails as well, and then to determine what value of a sponsorship revenue we could get out of that. So it's different from asset management in the sense that we're looking to see what buildings we have and what kind of revenue could we get from having sponsorship, naming rights and all those kind of things on the building. So it's not, we know what buildings we have, but this would be determining what kind of values to put on.
So the person that's successful with the RFP will come in and say, well, this building we can sell as far as the sponsorship is concerned, and this one we can't.
Yes.
Right. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to voice support for a more expedited timeline, because I think this is one of those issues that, well, I'll just be very honest, I'm extremely uncomfortable with, but the phasing of it will never change my discomfort. The discomfort is just selling sponsorships. So the speed, really, I don't see any impact on it, so I would support an expedited timeline.
Councillor Brown wants the Band-Aid real quickly. Councillor Hammond.
Thank you. I would express the exact same sentiment. The whole thing makes me uncomfortable, but there's no point in doing it slowly. My question about the $95,000, if I recall, that was the gentleman who came in and gave the presentation, that was the dollar amount he figured for having. So are we not just saying, okay, someone named us a price and we're now putting that price in our budget? Would we not go out with an RFP to ask companies to come in at a lower price?
Through your worship, yes. We would be doing an RFP to determine who's out there and what prices they would do the work for. So this is just kind of that's what we ballparking that figure. That's all it is right now.
Councillor Bonner.
I would like to put a motion forward that we combine phase 1 and 2 and issue an RFP for both, with phase 1 to be done first and phase 2 to be done after that.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Hammond. Let me just say, since I suspect everybody's had to say they want to say on this, Councillor Thorpe wants to jump in at any time, of course, but I appreciate the concerns that Councillor Brown and Hemmons have. I think I know what they are. 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have been extremely sympathetic to the position they're taking. I mean, it rubs me the wrong way that public facilities get named for individuals who have accumulated a great deal of wealth. We don't name them because, you know, some poor hardworking person devoted their lives and never made much money, probably deserved a great honor in the community. We don't name buildings for them anymore or places. We do it because, candidly, there's someone with a large amount of money to donate or support an organization, an individual, etc. And I'm in a philosophical. I can tell a little story this morning. The old schoolhouse gallery, which has been the subject of many of the letters we've received lately around art in this community. I may have told this story before, and if I have, forgive me, but when that school was proposed to be built in Qualicum Beach, there was one female member of the school board. And all the aging white males on that board of that day wanted a very pedestrian-looking building, to put it bluntly. It's a favorite phrase of our CAOs, pedestrian. And this woman, who was very poor, argued strenuously that, in fact, it should have that grand staircase that takes you up into the building, that it should have that wonderful facade. And her point was that that was because that when students came to that school and they saw this wonderful building, they would understand that it was important. And therefore what took place in that building was important. And that was public education. She carried the day. Never named the school for her. I can't tell you what her name is. Somebody who's got a better grasp of the annals of the history of Qualicum Beach will probably tell me. And maybe someday some wealthy sponsor will come along and want their name slapped on the old schoolhouse gallery for a few months. And so I understand the tension around this. But having said all that, at the end of the day, this has become common. Municipalities do it across this country. And at a time when the needs in our city are growing and expanding, I think it is only right and proper that we take full advantage of every opportunity within legal means to raise money that would otherwise not be available to the citizens of this community. So as much as I appreciate the positions taken, and I obviously have engendered a certain amount of debate now, I just want to say I'll be fully supportive of this for the reasons I've stated. Councillor Hemmings and Councillor Brown.
I won't debate you, but I'll say when I was reading this report, I kind of landed on a phrase, and that's that for me it's distasteful, but it's ultimately practical. And so that's what we need to do.
Lovely phrasing. She just said in 2 seconds what I took 10 minutes to blabber out. Councillor Brown.
I'm going to tell a story too. But I understand, I think from reading the report that ultimately there'll be sort of a menu where you can pick and choose which assets can be branded or sponsored. But just a quick story, as I was driving the other day with Damon in the back, it's 2.5. The wind was really blowing, and the Canadian flag, I think the Harris dealership on the corner there was blowing. And Damon's at the stage where he's always saying, "What's that data? What's that data?" And he said, "What's that data?" And I said, "No, it's the Canadian flag." And he said, "No data, Canadian Tire." So I think that's the risk. When we sell all our assets in the public domain, we lose maybe the greater good that you were elegantly speaking to there.
As a patriot, I'm quite crushed to hear that.
I'll just respond to Councillor Brown by saying that as you mature and get older, you can't tell the difference.
I'm not so sure based on this discussion.
Your Worship, just could I add to your comment about, this is part of an ongoing conversation which probably leads us into the fees and charges discussion as well, about the need or the desire for the municipality to seek innovative and alternate funding sources in addition to its basic taxation, property taxation rights and needs. So it's a way to afford some of the many requests that you see come through these finance and audit committees and so forth. It generates some, generally it exceeds our capacity to do what people are asking us to do. So it behooves us to come to you with ideas around alternate funding sources in any realm that would help to give us sustainable funding in different ways, because it does help offset the pressures on the taxation for the property owners. So it's part of that conversation about looking at alternate, additional revenue streams for the municipality, in addition to cost cutting. So I think we have to be more proactive in looking at things that make it more affordable to do things. This is one. Partnerships is another. The whole balance of fees and charges versus general subsidy, all those kinds of things fit into this conversation. So it's a part of the menu of things. And yes, I agree with Councillor Brown. There will be some criteria, the selection process, and it's not just big buildings, it's programs, all sorts of things that can be sponsored that offset those costs. In fact, the city's already doing that in some of its activities in the Fayette Sutton and that type of thing, where revenue streams are attached. This formalizes and brings that policy a little more clear out. So the council will certainly be in the driver's seat in an informed way about knowing what assets have the potential to have a value assigned to them if there was some kind of a brand attached to it, be it an activity or a facility. So, yeah, it's just, there's a broader conversation here that I think we need to have over the course of time about what is our sustainable funding sources here in addition to taxation. Maybe it's a happy place right now, but just looking at those is what we're doing in this time.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to resist the temptation to tell a lengthy story, but I will comment briefly. For me, I share some of the sort of hesitations that others have expressed around the table, but I think the point is well taken that we will eventually be able to pick and choose and make those decisions. And I have to say that I'm not sure I agreed with your comment, Your Worship, about naming, because when I look around our city, I notice a number of facilities that are named for longtime community volunteers that did not get their name on a building because they had piles of money. And I look at Merle Logan Field and Rosario Way, which we just recently approved, and examples like that. So I think we don't want to lose that in our community. But at the same time, I feel we do need a policy. And this is setting us on the path to forming a policy. At first, I was in favor of the phased approach, but the more I think about it, I think I agree with Councillor Bonner that it makes sense to do phase 1 and phase 2 together. It's most likely going to be the same proponent that is successful, so let's get it done and move ahead. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Clean BC Better Homes Rebate Program. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. The province has recently come to us with an opportunity to participate in a rebate program, as you mentioned, called the Clean BC Better Homes Program. And essentially, this is rebates that they are providing that will be available for residents who have oil furnace or natural gas furnaces, to have those replaced with air source heat pumps. There's an opportunity for municipalities to participate and increase the amount that's being offered through this rebate program. And as outlined in the report, we're recommending that the city allocate $100,000 from the sustainability the Emissions Reductions Reserve Fund, which currently has a balance of $444,000. The $100,000 will allow us to participate in the program over the next 2 years. Obviously, at this point, we'd be estimating how many people could possibly participate. But if in the end, the $100,000 is fully subscribed in the 2 years, we would come back to council with an update on that. Likewise, if there was not the uptake that we would anticipate, those additional funds would go back into that emissions fund. Your Worship, if there's any specific questions about the program or the report, Mr. Lawrence is here. We'd be happy to hear them.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate this is a great opportunity, I think, to make a dent, albeit probably small. My concern is I don't think it's big enough. And I would like to see us follow North Vancouver and provide $2,000 rebates, $500 and $1,000. And the reason I'm suggesting this is that I believe that the people who need this rebate are typically folks who have older homes because they couldn't afford to build a nice brand new one up on top of a mountain somewhere. And so there's a number of houses in our town that are on oil, and they probably couldn't afford it, but a $2,000 bump up might make it within their budget. And so I think this is one of these things where we go big or go home, and we should just embrace it. And I would be looking to fund it with another $100,000 from our Nope, 100,000 from that and $100,000 from our surplus, which we know is coming. Now, if somebody wants that as a motion, I will do that.
Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, I'm not sure if there was a question in there, but I just want to make sure. Clarify that the money that the city would be providing in the grant would top up what others are including. So any resident would be eligible, and it's outlined in the report here of you get it's up to $4,500 in total grants. And the estimate was, Rob, correctly, about $10,000.
For a changeout?
For a changeout. So
Yeah,
yes.
only 13,000 actually.
So I just want to give you a sense of the grants relative to the overall cost of doing a conversion.
Councillor Butler.
And
the costs are higher in the Lower Mainland, I think, because...
Rob, could you come up to the front,
Oh,
please?
sure, sorry. It was just a comment.
Just a reminder that the costs are relative to where in the province the program is run. So while North Vancouver does have a higher rebate top-up, the cost for the changeouts were higher as well than typically on the island. Just to kind of keep that in perspective.
And I appreciate that. I'm just saying is that extra $1,650 might be the tipping point, because it literally put us over half of what the actual cost is. And it would be in our best interest to do that. So that's what I'm suggesting, is we go with $2,000.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I would support this, with the exception of the surplus bid. I would support it from the emissions reduction reserve. That's why it was established, and then if council so deemed that that fund could use more money, they could make that decision through surplus conversations, but not knowing what the surplus is and not knowing what other expenses might be covered, I would feel more comfortable taking it from a reserve that was initially taxed for but had no use. So I'd like to pay money to use.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. I'm in full support of rebates. I'd be happy to explore upping what we offer. My question is one of strategy. This seems like a great partnership opportunity, but I would imagine something like this would be filtered through the Environment Committee, and it would be part of what the Environment Committee is trying to forward as a whole. Is this a one-off, or is this because it's an opportunity and we're just grabbing onto it? Just what's the context in terms of that strategy?
Your Worship, I think, and that's an excellent point. Had we had more time, it would have not come through the Environment Committee and allowed for that conversation. The reality of this program is they're looking for answers from municipalities by
First week of March.
First week of March. So that's why we're here, and any recommendation coming out of this would be looking for council coming over on Monday night so that we can meet that timeline so that they can roll it out with their program that they are rolling out this spring.
Yeah, the first week of April, the program launches with all the participating municipalities.
Councillor Hammonds and Councillor Turvin.
Thank you. And then do we need to have the decision today about how much of a rebate we would offer in terms of the 1,000 versus 2,000, or is it okay just to say, yes, we're going to offer a rebate and participate in this partnership?
My understanding is that they're going to want, because they're going to be publishing materials, they're going to want to know what we're in for.
Before I go to Councillor Turley, I want to comment, as much as I'm always sympathetic to us sticking to a commitment we've made around the environment, and I think it's important and signal. I'm reminded of Mr. Cuff, first term deferred, and basically a doubling of something without staff consideration, without it going through the Environment Committee. As much as I'm sympathetic, I'd be reluctant to support that today. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. My concern with doubling the amount of money that we're going to put into this program is that it may be premature. I mean, you may get a lot of uptake at the original amount, and it's far easier to, at a later date, add money to the program than it is to say, well, we didn't need it, so we're going to take it back. I just think, having gone through the process with the heat pump, I think it cost us $6,000, of which we got a $1,000 rebate from BC Hydro. So it's okay with us, and if hadn't been working for city council, I might have looked at other options, given I didn't have the extra income. But I would prefer to start at the lower level to begin with, and then if we find a huge demand or cry like we do, we can't afford it, then we can look at something bigger down the road.
Councillor Hemmings?
Thank you. I would also support the staff recommendation, but more so because we don't know what strategy is coming from the Environment Committee, and keeping that budget at allowing them more money to work with is gonna, I think, serve their purposes.
Councillor Brown?
Okay, so, thank you, Your Worship. Just to break this down a little bit, there is no strategy on the horizon from the Environment Committee. Moreover, Council adopted a target of 50% reduction by 2010 levels by 2030. And if we start this year, that's 5% a year. Our two biggest things, which are fully within our jurisdiction, and thankfully the province is helping out a bit, in quite a big way, is transportation and building efficiency. Building efficiency also includes how those buildings are heated. So in terms of bang for your buck, doubling up on a provincial program where they're being extremely generous with rebates, to me is sort of one of those things where you can leverage money to see real action. The best case scenario would be that all 200,000 of our funds are used within the year, because it means we're actually making progress on these targets. So I will wholeheartedly support this and more when it comes to transportation and building efficiencies.
Well, speaking of support, we don't have a motion on the floor yet.
I would like to put a motion on the floor that we participate in the Clean BC Better Homes Rebate Program, and that Nanaimo contribute to electric heat pump $2,000, electric service upgrade $500, electric heat pump water heater $1,000, contractor participation $550, and the Energy Guide home energy assessment of $150, right across the board.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Councillor Hemmings?
Thank you. I'm going to support, in light of hearing from the co-chair of the Environment Committee. However, I will offer some sage advice from someone who's co-chair maybe 6 months longer. The Health and Housing Task Force didn't have any. I think we were kind of also grasping, and I think an opportunity came, and having the opportunity to leverage funds came later than we expected. So, but I'm in support for the reasons you gave.
Councillor, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. I just to clarify with Councillor Bonner that the additional funds for all of those programs that you listed would be coming from, we would be moving from the Emissions Reduction Reserve Fund.
Yes.
And then just one more thing, Your Worship. If Ms. Mercer knows that money is available in the reserve fund.
Your Worship, yeah, the balance in that reserve fund is approximately $444,000. So there isn't.
So $200,000 a year would cover it for 2 years.
That's just 200,000 total.
Okay, 200,000 total.
Councillor Hemmings?
Thanks. A follow-up question for staff. We currently have some rebate programs. Are they well utilized?
Our wood stove change-up program, I'd say, is well utilized. I think more targeted marketing would up the number of rebates that we receive. We do have a home assessment rebate that is, I think, underutilized. I don't think the word is out well enough in the community to take advantage of that. But again, through more targeted marketing, those numbers could improve. And the advantage of the Clean BC program is that the province would have more of a direct role in the marketing, plus contractors would also be more involved in marketing the program on the ground.
Councillor Hemmings?
Thanks. Just a follow-up then. I would like to see us do a major push in communications for these are the rebates available in concert with this. And I know through the RDN that the water cistern program is, we could even be giving more rebates for those as the RDN. So I think just being really clear with residents what their opportunities are when we do stuff like this is going to be important for uptake.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Just if I may add, the when we first took office, there was 600 and something thousand in this emission reduction reserve fund that had a $60,000 a year line item based on carbon pricing that was based on an out-of-date MOU with the regional district of Nanaimo. So it was money being taxed with no intended use, and year over year. Under the original MOU, it was established for initiatives like this to reduce carbon footprint. So to me, this is one of those cases where when someone says, hey, what have you done to not increase taxes but to provide a better level of service, which I'm sure some of you get that criticism often, or at least sometimes, this is one of those things. Yeah, we converted money that was being taxed for and not used to purchase, 4 EV vehicles for our staff here to deliver help our corporate emissions. But we do know that the biggest, Rob has a great, Mr. Lawrence has a great, more formal environmental committee, a great graph that sort of shows anything that we do corporately is nothing compared to community-wide action. And so I think, this unlocking these funds for this community-wide action that is really being leveraged well with the province is a really great step in the right direction and has no tax hit.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff, is this program available for only residential properties or commercial properties?
Residential primarily, yes.
Primarily or only?
Only, sorry.
For what it's worth, I'm siding with Councillor Turley in this one today. We're being asked to participate in the program. It's just getting started. As much as I'm always appreciative of the enthusiasm brought to this table around issues, I think this is one where I would rather go slow, looking at the potential costs that will be paid for by the province and the benefits that people will already receive. And candidly, one thing that always sticks in the back of my mind is this program is essentially aimed at homeowners. It's not aimed at tenants. It's not aimed at the poorest in our community. It will provide a benefit to people who already have an interest in real estate. And so from my classical lefty roots, offering rebates, I think, is often a benefit to people who are already somewhat ahead of the game in life. And so I won't be supporting the motion. Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I've always been supporting the motion, and the reason is exactly what you just raised there. We have an awful lot of rental properties in this town that are on oil. And they're on oil still because the landlord has decided not to upgrade. This will lower that disincentive because of cost to do the upgrade so that our poorest in our community no longer have to pay out $800 every time a truck shows up in the front yard, which is almost impossible for some people. And then they're starting to make decisions. So I think this is, on that point alone, is why I would support this thing, just to get these things changed over.
Councillor Brown and Councillor Hammonds.
Yeah, just in response, Clean BC isn't a poverty reduction strategy, it's a climate action strategy. So I think that's comparing apples to oranges.
That was precisely my point. I think we're confusing two issues, and we have the money in the bank to do this and earmarked for this purpose. We're hearing from the co-chair of the Environment Committee that this aligns with the work they're doing. So I'm in support.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've been listening intently to the debate on both sides, and I appreciate the comments. I supported Councillor Bonner's motion on the last topic to sort of rush ahead with Phase 1 and Phase 2 of our sponsorship initiative. I can't support him rushing ahead to double our interest in this rebate program. I support being part of it, but I personally am of the nature that I want to see how it goes. I want to see what other opportunities evolve in the future through the Environment Committee for using possible funds that we have at our disposal. So I'm not inclined to put all of our eggs in one basket at this point. So I will not be supporting the proposed doubling of our participation.
Councillor Bonner.
Just for the record, Your Worship, I'm not suggesting we double it, I'm suggesting we actually increase it by 5 times in some places. Hopefully that will change.
Thank you for that.
Yes, that'll really change.
All those in favor? Opposed? Time, motion fails. Would anyone care to go back and make the staff motion? Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Very good debate.
I'm in favor. I'll fix it up later.
So, Your Worship, just on, actually a question of process. Now, does this item go to council, or because it's been defeated? Because you will have another chance to discuss this at the council meeting with the full council presumably in attendance, so it's still...
Which I will ask to have it brought out.
So, Your Worship, just to be clear to Mr. Rudolph, the defeated motion won't go to the council meeting. This approved motion will be under consent items on the agenda, and council can pull it out and discuss it again.
Very good. Do we want to take a break before we start on the next item, which will be the lengthy item? 10 minutes. Thank you very much. And then we'll be on to what was Kate is now.
I don't know, I see it, there's that one, figure it out.
I kind of...
Your Worship, it's okay if we down in the table.
I told him, I suggested he go out there.
Mr. Hardinger, all is well. Yes, sit at your table.
Hey, we got a report on one before we begin.
On our staff's draft recommendations. And with that, we have Laura Clarkson, Recreation Manager. Actually, she's acting Director of Recreation and Culture because Ms. Williams left us. And so she's answering on the recreation side. We also have David Johnson, the Arena Manager, present, and Kathy Gonzalez, our Aquatics Manager, present. So if you have any questions, particularly in those areas, and again, Laura and I can answer the general aspects too on other fees and charges. So as we mentioned back in December, we went through, we haven't had a change to our fees and charges bylaw or an increase to fees and charges in Parks, Recreation and Culture since 2015. And so just to kind of run you through kind of the process of what we'd like to achieve is have a new bylaw in place, which should have to have the 3 readings and an adoption by council by June of this year. And the rationale for that is we need to develop our activity guide that goes out in August for fall, winter, as well as ideally our fees would change September 1st, as a lot of our rentals and particularly our ice rentals, but our swim rentals also, our major bookings are from September to May of those years. So the goal is really to get this in place by June. So with that, just kind of running through the timeline, is today we're giving it to you as an information report. We'll go through some of those details, come back to Finance and Audit in a month's time. In that time, Council had a chance to review it. Also, those who aren't able to be here today. Also, though, we'll make sure all our user groups, particularly our rental groups, are aware of proposed changes. We have been advising them all along of the proposed changes coming forward. This, though, now is a public document, so we're actually shows what staff's the increases that we're proposing. As we go through it, there's some that we are proposing to stay the same, and we'll go through each of those. So that's the kind of process. First off, is any questions at all before we start on the process before we go into the details?
Doesn't look like it, please.
So I'll go through a slide just as, and Mr. Rudolph mentioned this a little bit. It's just wanted to make sure this is a slide to keep in mind is when we start debating about fees and charges, what are we looking at? And I use these continuums, and they may not be the right terms of continuums, but it's in fees and charges, particularly in Parks, Recreation and Culture, you're really looking at a benefits approach. to it. So does the whole community benefit? Do some benefit? So the ones I gave you back in December is direct impacts versus benefits. So one end of the continuum, a service we provide may benefit very few. To the other end, that benefits all the community. So typically we'll say, what benefits all the community would be a park or a trail that the whole community has access to. They may not use it themselves, but they can see it, enjoy it, open space, things like that. The far end, the other side, where it may be a specialized high-end athletic training course or a cultural program that's specific to a high-end dance group or something like that, where it's on the other side of the extreme. And I know you know all this, but it's also just good to have this background again when we're debating it, because fees and charges as sponsorship isn't always the most fun to talk about, because we are trying to establish something that the community really enjoys, our access to facilities and programs, and yet we need to provide some kind of user cost to that. The other one is that the community determines, or in a situation, council determines where we are along that continuum. And so today we'll talk about aspects where we have some aspects where it's 100% user pay, to the other part and where it's 100% taxpayer pay. Again, an example of that would be our parks and our trails, playgrounds, things like that. The other end extreme would be specialized equipment or program material that we would 100% recover from the user. So I just want to throw that slide up. One, I like that slide.
Are you being like President Trump? If you put it out in the open, it's not really trying to persuade us, it's just,
whatever analogy you'd like to add to it that helps get us along this process to a bylaw improved by June, I'm into it. So just to go through it, Council, Your Worship, and I can go as much detail or a little bit like, but ideally the aspect and staff is developing the bylaw or the changes. We definitely took into account we haven't had an increase in 2015. That being said, I still believe that our increases are very conservative. We're not moving. Some are keeping actually the same. And a lot of our proposed changes is really to be consistent with other communities on Vancouver Island, because they have been increasing. We have not done some changes. But in doing that, a number of issues that we look at is current operating costs, market conditions, which again, market conditions is in comparison to other communities, inflationary costs and cost of living increases, pricing to encourage fullest and most effective use, funding lifestyle replacement of associated equipment, and that gets more on the specialized programs, in comparison to other Vancouver Island communities. As mentioned, the presentation we did in December was up again for the public, which will go through philosophy. The part that council may want to spend time with us today, and again we can answer any question, is attachment B, which starts on page 57. And Your Worship, we could go line by line with that, or if there's specific questions of council, what their views are. This attachment B is really the meat of the changes or the non-changes that staff are going to be coming back next month with recommendations that council adopted.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. To you, Mr. Harding. The one that I would like to ask a question on is under number 3, sorry, on page 59. And that's renaming senior 80 plus years to super senior. And probably as I'm closer than most to being a super senior. I would like to ask, first of all, what is kind of the uptake? Is like a huge number of people take advantage of this, or marginal?
There's a growing increase to this, and we do have some financials on that. I don't have it in front of me now. Laura may have that. If not, I can make sure we have that for next month with the actual impact on that. But it is getting more and more used, and particularly those that use it frequently. Okay,
so the second part of my question is, given that the 80 is the new 70, I'm wondering if there's any consideration to given to make it 85 instead of 80?
Your worship, these are the exact conversations we'd love to have with council now, is those types of aspects. We introduced this maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, and it actually is a benefit definitely to that age group, but it's also definitely a loss of revenue on that. So council can consider those.
I'll go to Councillor Emmons then. I'd like to get a sense of whether you want to go through this in a sort of line-by-line process in a logical way, or whether you want to ask a series of questions.
Can you give me some background as to why we go with age categories paying certain things rather than income paying certain things?
So a bit of a history aspect of it is that particularly Parks Recreation really grew out of providing services to youth. So that's really go back to the YMCA's and other aspects of getting youth off the streets and active in programs. So the growth of a lot of recreation and sport programs, and you can go back to Rotarians and other service clubs over the last 100 years, is really to provide those activities for youth. So there's always been an age aspect of youth first. In fact, our booking processes are also youth first. So prime time is youth, adult goes later. So that's the main aspect of what we've done. The seniors component, again, is more historic in the sense of the idea of adults. That's where they're making the most income, where retirement then is fixed income. So that evolved into more of a cost reduction or price reduction for that group. You'll notice what we've changed here and proposing to change here is that we're finding now is our youth or young adult. We've tried to change that and increase that more to what is more broader definition of, what's the term, Laura, again, we have for it? It's
young adult. Well, we're proposing to eliminate the youth or the student rate for drop-in admissions and change it to be youth, whether you're in school or not. So a 21-year-old, for example, that's not attending post-secondary would still meet the criteria to have that lower accessible rates.
Right, which I really appreciate. I like that the expansion of that. My question is more about, we know that poverty exists for any age. I'm guessing it would be bureaucratically a bit of a nightmare to ask people to prove their income in order to see where they line up as far as admission rates go. But for an efficiency perspective, getting people who can't afford to use services to services, that seems like a better approach to me. So have we ever considered it, or do other communities do it that way? What would that entail?
So your worship, Councillor Emmons, so that's our LEAP program. So that's our economic program to utilize for that. So then they come in, they can qualify, they get so many free passes, they get a percentage off program access. And that program we are looking to review, and I think council's also had questions about the LEAP program this last year, particularly with a lot of the increase in transfer payments for families with children. They've actually bumped them up over that threshold. So we're going to come back to council with a broader update to the LEAP program for consideration. And again, if I could on that one, that program initially was 100% just for youth.
Okay.
Then we switched it to, with the idea thinking, well, the youth are enjoying it, but the parents are sitting outside, so we changed it to adults. Now, however, that program now is the majority of the users of that program are adults and not youth.
Okay.
So we would bring some of those updates to this.
So the LEAP program is amazing, but it is really, to qualify for the LEAP, you have to meet a minimum that I think would leave out the classification of, it's a terrible term, but the working poor. So those people who are working but are maybe, still hovering on the poverty line, they don't qualify for LEAP, and they're paying full admission rates. And I'm not against that. I'm just kind of curious about this. Seems to be a philosophical approach that we do it categorically by age, which I totally understand history. But I'm just kind of curious, if we were to look at going by income, what would that look like?
My staff's recommendation would be use a program, a modified program of LEAP to expand it. To
Okay.
just that, because then it's always whoever's at the counter, dealing with the counter, and how do they
Yeah.
they show those aspects. So we definitely bring the LEAP program back to the council's review. Laura's working on that for this year, one of her work plans, so getting that. And we can talk more. So that would be our recommendation. Just things you'll hear issues about disability. And so we haven't used disability as an access issue. It's been age or economic. Student LEAP program. We don't have a disability program.
Thank you.
Councillor Bradley, Councillor Bonner?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to add sort of, to me, it's hard to make decisions about this divorced from decisions around the LEAP program. So, just using the examples of the super senior, I think it's odd that it's free. I think it's odd that it's a separate category. But I would absolutely support an individual, regardless of age, having access to, through the LEAP program, whatever that looks like, expanded or not. So it makes it very difficult for me to make a decision on that category when there might be other options available. And so I'm just kind of wondering if we can do that all at once together.
Your Worship, we can look to bring back as we to finance not next month an overview of the LEAP program. I guess what I would say to council is that this is a bylaw that will council adopts will last 4 years with some stepped increases. Where the LEAP program, council can change any time we want, or it can change the bylaw too, but it's much more onerous. And I think if you remember during inauguration time, we probably spoke to a lot of you about why it's very important to have a bylaw in place for Parks, Recreation and Culture, because you're constantly going to be lobbied to eliminate a fee for renting Bevan Pool or Bevan Park or anything else because of all the great events that community groups do, and they are good. So this is really the bylaw where LEAP is a program that can change as per council's desire, and it does fluctuate based on the federal government's changing rate of what the poverty line is.
Right. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to state that I'm philosophically opposed to raising the rates at all. And I would like them to remain the same for at least our term. And the reason being philosophical, and if I may borrow Mr. Harding's little map there, little page there, we are not having a conversation right now about the fact that we spend an awful lot of money on roadways, and we allow our citizens to use the roadways tax-free. I mean, free. As taxpayers pay, they're right at the 100% there. We also allow all of our citizens to park their privately owned cars on our publicly owned right-of-ways for free, for the most part. But we're having a conversation here on recreation facilities that increase the health of our citizens, and we're having a conversation of whether or not we should be charging them. And I think the whole thing should be reversed, quite frankly. So I am not going to agree to increasing these fees at all. And if we need the extra $50,000, I believe that's the money we're going to actually raise, we can take it out as sponsorship revenue when it shows up. Because we will be selling these actual facilities, the rental, the naming rights. So maybe.
Interesting perspective, Councillor Bonner. Now, can we go back? I was looking for some indication that we're going to go through this in, we just want to, is that fair?
Sure. Your Worship, I just want to make sure, if I could though, I just want to make sure that that there's...
You hit the points, Mr. Harding, if I may interrupt, you hit the points that you think we need to know so we don't blow back at you at some point in the future and say, oops.
Just want to make sure that you realize some of the changes. So there's a lot of it's just wording changes as bylaw, wording aspects to it, but there are some specific categories because we deal with aquatics differently than we deal with arenas and sports fields and so forth. So there, as you go through that Appendix B, there's some changes by those sections. And we've also included the existing draft bylaw for your information as a background. We don't have the newest schedule because we didn't want necessarily, if there was a desire not to make any changes, which gets to us right here. This is where community determines, and you determine what those are. We didn't want to do that, although we are working with the new schedules too that will go into the bylaw. But as long as council has a chance, that's really the areas to really see if our proposed changes is attachment B.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thanks, I'd just like to say I read through attachment B in detail and the proposed changes look good to me. I'm not against increasing our admission rates in line with the rate of inflation. I agree with Councillor Bonner. I would love for this to be free, and I would love to find another source of revenue, perhaps by not allowing people to park for free. But until that conversation is on the table, I'm comfortable with the proposed changes.
Mr. Rudolph.
Worship, when I was talking to Mr. Harding about this, I was there were certain principles in my mind that I think we should be thinking about in addition to the details of each of these. One strikes me as the whole premise of inflation. I mean, we're not building any inflationary aspects into our fees when they're flat line for 4 years. So the costs continue to escalate, whatever they happen to be, let's say 2% a year, and yet so we're actually consciously changing. It's not a level playing field, pun intended. We're actually changing it by not doing anything. So it's just, what about the premise of inflation? At least maintaining the status quo. Is that what? The second would be the issue of fairness between not only the fairness between user groups, and where in those continuums do you see that? So ball players versus the soccer players versus the hockey parents with the high rates and all those, where's the fairness piece in this for, and so that's, and then I think we're hearing the premise around accessibility, period, and so at the end of the day, it still costs money to provide these services, so we're asking where's the balance in those continuums as to where we are trying to find which ones are general for cars and what's the analogy for, I guess, parks in the passive parks and for our municipality would be the same on that free side, and then what's over the other side. So it just, to me, it was, how can we not deal with inflation at least? I was troubled by that because it just struck me as that would still maintain the status quo in terms, that's assuming the balance of where our fee structures are correct right now. So what, are the fees correct? And then do you put right sizing the fees? And then secondly, do you build an inflationary clause into those fees where you feel they're appropriate or do you not? So I just wanted to say that because to me, inflation is almost impossible to not understand. So is that something that you, there's nuances to this, so there's all kinds of variations in this formulas here and reasons for it, but I just wanted to say that.
Mr. Harding and then Councillor Bonner.
And then just to Mr. Rudolph, is really, again, is we have we have over 100, close to 200 trails that are free access, lots of parks and aspects. What we're really looking at is some of those programs, though, that aren't benefiting everybody. So those are a lot of the bylaw, we get into some of the principles of it, it's how it's written. It really gets into, we're moving along this continuum to those areas, be it ice or be it high-end aquatics, or where we're moving along where there's not as many people have or will access it or maybe want to access it. Whereas our parks are on this side, they're not included at all in this.
Thanks for going.
Just a note on the inflationary thing, if we don't raise our fees at all, then we're making the ability for our citizens to use our recreational facilities 2.3% cheaper each year. So we can look at it that way.
Everybody else has thrown something inside, I'm going to throw something in because this, I philosophically, I've always believed in universal programs and people paying the basis of income tax, essentially. That's my basic, simplistic philosophy of life. Not fond of user fees, don't believe in a general principle. But having said that, when I look at, for instance, what my own family utilizes in terms of community infrastructure, grandchildren go to the pool occasionally. I don't think I've ever actually swum in the city pools, ever. They use the gyms for lacrosse and whatnot, and no, I haven't taken up pickleball yet, notwithstanding the encouragement of many of my colleagues around the table.
In Withstand?
But, you know, as Mr. Harding points out, all of us can walk on the park trails for free. Doesn't cost anything in the direct sense. Nobody expects me to pay a user fee. I'm more likely to utilize it, just as are most of the people in the community. But, you know, with great respect, if somebody needs an expensive hardwood floor in which to play their pickleball or play badminton or an expensive swimming pool that we create so that we can create an artificial environment at no small impact on greenhouse gas emissions by keeping a pool heated in the middle of the winter so that people can do in the winter what normally speaking we used to only do in the summer when I grew up, because there were no pools available in the Central Island, I can assure you. My wife is old enough to remember when Dave Stupich used to provide his swimming pool for swimming lessons for young people. Councillor Thorpe nodding sagely. Councillor Turley as well. It's not like having the old guys around the table to remind you of the way things used to be, and in terms of what was regarded as an inappropriate use of public expenditure. If you had gone to referendum in 1948 in this town and said we want to build a swimming pool, people would have gone nuts. A swimming pool? No. So, having said that, I guess what I'm trying to say in an indirect way is this. Some of those expensive, high maintenance, high carbon footprint facilities, I don't think it's inappropriate to ask people to pay. And I get Councillor Bonner's point, but at the same time, it applies to a fairly small percentage of the community, relatively speaking. We're not talking about the broader public who will still continue to have access to all kinds of things. So I don't think it's inappropriate to charge. Having said that, I am strongly in support of the concept of an improved LEAP program, as you call it. But I also heard all the horror stories of the early days of my grandparents and that generation who first saw the benefit of a national pension plan and that horrible thing called the means test that was so demeaning for people who had to prove that they were in fact poor so that they'd be eligible to collect a pension. Very distasteful bit of Canadian history. As opposed to having universal pensions and then you pay income tax if that boosted you into another income bracket, etc., etc. But I don't want to go on too long this morning, but I guess my point is, I think we should charge for some of this stuff. But we shouldn't charge for some of it so that it prevents poorer families from having access. So if you do have the son or the daughter who's going to be a brilliant swimmer and may have a career in the Olympics and represent Canada, etc., and bring glory and honor to their community, I wouldn't want to see them denied that opportunity because of money alone. But I don't think it's inappropriate to charge for the part of the expense of operating that facility, which is, with great respect, I suspect, and Mr. Harding will correct me if I'm wrong, a great deal more expensive to maintain than a trail through Bowen Park or a walkway that's already well established or all the other things where we can recreate in this community without even considering payment of a fee. Who wants to jump in first? Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I'm generally supportive. I think I could go both ways, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, are you proposing a carbon tax on our carbon intensive? We could build that into the fee structure.
It's certainly a consideration. I think
it's a good one.
You know, I'm just 2/3 of the way through the Third Industrial Revolution, Mr. Rifkin's book, and reminding me again that it's not the population of the planet, it's us who are the problem. The population of those parts of the planet where we consume great numbers of resources and all of the things, every time we eat a pound of beef, etc., all of those things, it's a nice reminder. And so, yes, maybe we should consider that. Maybe it requires a complete shift, and whether we lead that, I don't know. But this morning we were just talking about something a little more pedestrian, to use Mr. Rudolph's language, and that is whether or not we're going to basically ask the community to kick in $50,000 more to help operate a range of facilities, which frankly are very rarely the source of complaint in this community. It's a wonderful thing about Mr. Harding's job, big responsibilities, but no one complains as much about the things he has to operate as some other poor people sitting around this room whose staff do an equally wonderful job for the good citizens of our community. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Wow, now I don't know what to say. Except my grandmother's house overlooks. I know it was well used. So I guess what stood out for me when I looked through Mr. Harding's report was and I appreciate this, a genuine, I think, attempt to establish fairness, which maybe is different things to different people, but I think there is a real effort to make things fair. And I also appreciate the comparisons with other island communities, because I think I always look to what we call best practice and what other people are doing. I also am very mindful of Mr. Rudolph's comments about inflation. And when we have not increased our user rates for 5 years now, and inflation, I'm sure, has run at, say, roughly 2% per year, that's gradually putting us into a hole that we need to be mindful of. And I would compare it to the philosophy of not having a tax increase for several years in a row and having 0% tax increase. And that might seem fine at the time, but in the long term, you end up paying for it and digging yourself out of that hole. Perhaps what we're doing a little bit of now. So I see in this report an attempt to be fair, to still have a large amount of our facilities 100% taxpayer pay, which benefits most of our community. The ones that are going to be hit by the what I'll call modest increases are the relatively small number of user groups that use those facilities for a relatively small number of our community. So I guess what I'm saying is, and I will add, I would support looking at the LEAP program. I think it's very worthwhile, and whatever we choose to change in that program will also affect our budget, but I'm willing to have that conversation. But I think in general, this proposed bylaw is reasonable, it's fair, I think it strikes a good balance, and although I could nitpick on a couple of specific points, basically I think it's a good document. Thank you.
Mr. Harding, carry on.
Just wanted to mention one more comment. At our December 2nd presentation, Ms. Williams did an overview of that presentation on the LEAP program. So there was some material, even though we tried to make sure it was separate, we know that they get blended together quite a bit. And again, that presentation is up online, and we'll make sure that it's up front again for people to go back and take a look. So, Your Worship, at this point, it is an information report. Again, with all intentions, we will come back at the Finance and Audit in March with recommendations.
Councillor Turling.
So the one question occurs to me with regard to user groups with minor sports. Have you received any feedback from any of them with regard to modest increases?
I think Council's received some emails from softball last year, and we can go through what those would look like.
Were they the only one?
Yeah, in general, and I know we gave general indications to all the user groups of both increases, particularly the ICE user groups are well aware of the increases proposed. They've been expecting it for some time. They've had, as Councillor Thorpe mentioned, no increases for a number of years. But once this is done, we'll make sure all user groups again have a copy of what we're proposing. And not to get enough emails, I'm sure you get a lot of emails on the next month.
Mr. Thorpe. Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to add on to Mr. Harding's comments, because and I haven't spoken to all of them by any means, but the user groups that have been in contact with me, they might not want the increases that are being proposed, but I think on the whole they recognize that some increases are coming and are perhaps justified. Their main concern is they want to know as soon as possible so that they can make their arrangements and do their budgeting. So I think that goes to Mr. Harding's point of getting this bylaw in place as soon as possible.
If I can throw one more thing out, I'm very respectful of the incredible history of this community, both during the long time of the Sinixt First Nation occupying these lands, and also since contact. And certainly in the Indigenous community, a lot of major athletes come out of Sinixt First Nation who achieved literally, as we well know, national fame. And I guess in behind what I'm trying to say here is this morning, that as we consider this, and I don't want to reduce it to all the crass elements of whether there's an increase or not an increase and whether or not certain groups are getting larger benefits, is to also keep in the back of our minds respect for the history of sport in this community. We have a Sports Hall of Fame at our museum. We honor people every year who enjoy induction into that. It is an important part of the history of this community, and I'm not saying you have to be stuck to whatever made a community famous at some point in its history and cling to it like some rock in a storm, but I think we have to be respectful of the importance of sport, athleticism in the history of this town, whether you were Indigenous or whether you came after first contact, and that value within our community. There was a time when this community's music program through the school produced some incredible musical talent. It's gone on to international fame. And those things don't happen by accident. So when we are talking about these kind of facilities, we're also keeping in mind that we may be the training ground for future athletes who will bring, as I said earlier, fame and honor to this community that wouldn't otherwise happen if we weren't prepared to spend some money to do so. So I just throw that out as another consideration. I mean, trying to be all things to all people this morning, but also trying to encourage a broad consideration of what we're doing here this morning. Because really, I'm very grateful to Mr. Harding, as I think I speak on behalf of council, that we're taking a more philosophical approach or a broader view of this, that this is to some extent reflecting our values as members of council, the values of people who write to us, but also, I would hope, the values of the community as a whole. Because community covers every one of us, and though I may not swim in the pool, I don't want to deny the opportunity for people in this community to swim in the pool, particularly if it keeps people healthy and active and gets families out to recreate together. That's a valuable thing. Anything further? Anyone?
No, thank you, Worship.
Oh, Mr. Harding, you're anxious to jump up. Who knows?
No, I'm not.
Just teasing, just teasing. Thank you very much for this. Look forward to the further presentation, and as you can see, there's a broad interest in this. No, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to take the opportunity at this time to thank the city staff members who were driving a rather large truck down Beaumont today. They stopped the traffic as I was riding my bike down at the corner of Wakasai and Bowen so that I could get across that green strip, which is kind of dangerous because a whole bunch of people want to go down Wakasai. And so I just wanted to reach out, and I don't know which department they were from. But
Big red truck?
It's not a big red truck. It was a big white truck, and they were carrying a trailer with a pallet of bags on it. So I just wanted to say thank you to them for doing that, and I wish all the drivers were that respectful. Thanks.
Pedestrians first, there you go. Thank you, Councillor Bonner.
I was driving a bike. I was walking.
Any other business?
And there's no questions, there's no questions.
And no questions? A motion for adjournment. Councillor Hemmond, seconded Councillor Bonner, all those in favor, motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Safe travels, Jim.
Yes, good.
Actually,